think you might call this getting to know you. So let's just read it as it was written, and then we'll consider, right? Since the Soviet Ministry of Petroleum was an instrument of the state, there was little resistance within the Soviet Union to using the country's petroleum this way. The first priority was to provide for domestic needs. The next was to use petroleum exports to generate the money needed to pay for the Soviet Union's and Eastern Europe's hard currency imports from the capitalist world. Anything extra available for export could then be used to promote the state's political goals. Unlike a private petroleum company, the Ministry of Petroleum did not feel constrained by normal corporate profit and loss considerations. To say the least, profit maximization was not an overriding objective. In fact, it usually played no role at all. Moreover, just as in the Tsarist era, the richer countries in the outside world, and especially the Seven Sisters, were not particularly welcoming to exports of Soviet petroleum. Both Western governments and businesses remained unforgiving about the nationalization of the Baku oil fields. For example, until 1971, the British went so far as to prohibit oil dealers, including a network of as many as 400 Soviet owned service stations located in the United Kingdom, from importing Soviet crude oil. The Soviet response was to arrange for their English subsidiary to import crude oil instead from Finland, which was strange since Finland is not often thought of as a petroleum powerhouse. In fact, Finland imported more than three-quarters of its petroleum from the USSR. Admittedly, this was a pain in the neck and added an extra step for the Soviet Ministry of Foreign Trade officials in charge of their British subsidiary, but it also shows how difficult it was to exclude Soviet petroleum exports from world markets. I'm going to skip a paragraph. As world energy demand, yes, let's get the sun, right? As world energy demand grew, however, attempts to exclude the Soviet Union from the capitalist world's petroleum markets became harder. Even more important, by the mid 1970s, it made increasingly less sense. The first serious Soviet challenge to important Seven Sisters markets occurred in 1960. ENI, an Italian energy company headed by Enrico Mattei, had been attempting to break into the Sisters Club. In 1957, he signed a contract with Iran to buy petroleum from that country at concessionary prices that were higher than those that had been offered Iran by the Seven Sisters. At the same time, he offered to sell potential customers that Iranian petroleum at a cut rate price. Increasing the pressure, Matai broke ranks again in 1960 by arranging for yet another out-of-order petroleum purchase, this time a cut rate purchase from Suez Export. He said, as he did with Iranian petroleum, he sought to sell this petroleum to Seven Sisters customers in Europe by undercutting the prevailing Seven Sisters price. This was considered a direct challenge to the ability of the Seven Sisters to control prices and a serious destabilizing threat. In some quarters, the inability of the Seven Sisters to prevent low-priced Soviet petroleum from breaching their monopoly control was viewed as the end of the Seven Sisters monopoly. But Soviet petroleum exports served as an equal opportunity spoiler. They not only undermined the Seven Sisters and their price control efforts, but they also undercut the efforts of the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries member countries that were trying to do the same thing. Created in September 1960, OPEC was set up to prevent private oil companies from cutting the price of the petroleum they purchased from Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Iraq, Iran, and Venezuela. These original members of OPEC attempted to do this by regulating how much petroleum each of these countries could produce, and by doing so, reduce worldwide supplies. But while most of the world's major petroleum exporters were curbing their production and exports, the Soviets were expanding theirs. By 1975, they had become the world's largest producer of petroleum, overtaking the United States, which had maintained that distinction continuously since 1902, when it outproduced the largest producer at that time, Tsarist Russia. Now, there's more, and we're going to get to that shortly. My understanding is that a very significant matter has occurred today, but it's not regarding gas and oil, is it? No. Now, part of the concern here is that gas and oil has a specific relationship with risk associated with chemical and biological weapons. And a refusal to appropriately address chemical and biological weapons accelerates and exacerbates risks associated with nuclear energy, right? And not attending to risk associated with nuclear energy has even more harrowing implications when put within the realm of other national defense matters, including stockpiles and inventories. And if you're in a situation where you may have to be considering the status of national assets, up to and including ones associated with the arsenal, then these matters become very important. And so does a proper acknowledgement of what should be allowed to be considered when and where. 1981 was a long time ago. Thus far, had there been an appropriate consideration of what it means to try to say someone's obligated to something when they're too young to even comprehend what it is, and if that had been adjusted and accounted for in consideration of other things that had potentially been identified correctly as merit toward accomplishing goals that could be used to identify methodologies by which to secure things, like matters related to national assets, it might have to have a very serious consideration in the event that there is some sort of paradigm shift. And we would also be in a different situation wherein we could acknowledge that within the last year and a half, 3 other 40-year time frames regarding major moments of security for the United States and other parts of the world dependent upon security in the United States would have been met successfully. We got a big problem though, right? Performance. Performance standards. Measurements of performance standards going all the way back to 1981. See, it seems the word never got back to the Federal Reserve. That really, really major matter actually did get attended to on time, right? But somebody else decided they wanted to take that and use that as either what? Risk credit? Insurance? And that's not what it was. It was nuclear security, right? So we've got a serious matter that needs to be attended to very, very soon. And I'm not using coffee as derivatives anymore, boys. You understand? So when you determine who you're going to place where, you understand I've already taken care of that. There are people that actually know about coffee, right? There should be people that know what I'm talking about without trying to get me to pretend to be a stripper. That's not acceptable. You understand? I hope you do. If you don't like the comportment, then maybe you should have come up with a better way to represent what you had left over as options on your Soviet crude, and we might be able to come to some sort of agreement. But I just watched you CCP, the Seven Sisters, and take them out. And unfortunately, what you're left with is me, right? So if you don't like it and you think there should be some other kind of refining process, then you're going to have to identify yourself really quickly.